Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ala Elbaz. I'm going to be talking with you guys to you guys for like half an hour in this webinar, and after that, we are going to have maybe another half an hour for Q&A. We're going to in this webinar. We are going to discuss managing contractual conflicts, in which we are going to focus on the conflicts, disputes, problems and issues that we usually face in contracts, especially here in the Middle East. So we are going to explore those different types, and then we are also going to talk about what are the best ways to manage those conflicts and disputes, like how to maybe to avoid them and how to handle them. We are going to start with, once again, my name is Ala Elbaz. I am a partner with Meirc Training and Consulting. I'm going to give you a little bit brief about myself. I have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Kuwait University. I have also a master's degree in mechanical engineering from University of Jordan. I have an MBA from Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan in the US, and I am a PMP certified. Professionally, I've been working as a project manager and contract manager for Daimler Chrysler, Ford Motor Company, and General Motors. I've been also a lecturer in University of Phoenix and Baker College. Currently, since almost 10 years ago, I've been working as a partner for Meirc Training and Consulting as a trainer. So this is a little bit introduction to about my background, and now let's take a look on the agenda. We're going to start off with defining contract. We are not going to focus on this by any means, just like going to go through it pretty quickly. We're going to talk about the problems usually stem from breaching of contracts. We're going to talk about breach of contract. We're going to talk about sources of those conflicts and then how to manage them. Then we're going to talk about disputes and settlements of those disputes. We're going to go through the alternative dispute resolutions. And finally, we're going to touch on some tips and best practices in contract management in order to avoid those disputes. Guys, if you have any question also, you can type it under the chat. We're going to collect those questions, and after we're done, we are going to go ahead and answer them. Let's start with defining the contract. Contracts, as we all know, probably is binding agreements between two or more parties. Most likely, it's going to be two parties, but it's binding. Binding means enforceable by court, and agreement, as we probably all know, it's an offer, acceptance, and consideration. Each party is legally bound to do or to refrain from doing certain acts according to the terms and conditions and the provisions of the contract. Once we have a contract, it's binding. That means it's enforceable, and you cannot really get out of it unless, of course, we rescind the contract, which means we take it back. If you rescind the contract by mutual understanding, then there will be no contract, no legal action. But if you do not fulfill your contractual obligation, then you start to have we enter what we call it the status of breach of contract. Breaching of contract is failing to perform any term of the contract, written, oral, of course, or anything that do not fulfill your contractual obligation. If you do not fulfill your contractual obligation, the other party have the right to take a legal action. He has the right to take you to court, or to file claims or do anything from within that aspect. A lot of time, of course, we have to remember that we normally when we administer and manage a contract, we focus on the relationships between the contractor and the principal. So this is more important than anything else. However, having said that, every contract, people like the two parties will eventually, will not fulfill every single maybe item. There will be some allowance, if you will, or some tolerance for performance. So if the contractor or the principal perform within this tolerance, truly there is nothing you can do for the other party. So in other words, the breach that the contractor should do or the principal would do should have to be significant, or what we call it a lot of time material breach, in order to take a legal action. If it wasn't a material breach, truly your chances or your leeway will be very limited. So again, that's why it's important to focus on the relationship, and it's very important not to ruin this relationship between the two parties. If you have any bad faith, of course, the contract in any country would assume there is a good faith. If you have any bad faith in going, or any bad intention when you enter the contractual obligation or contractual agreement, then of course you can take a legal action against the party that has a bad faith. So having good intention and good faith is one of the most important pillars in the contractual laws everywhere almost. Another thing we need to pay attention before we go a little bit further is the breach in itself can be considered with no importance at all if the other party, of course, waive that breach. For example, if the contractor is delayed, we usually hold them or hold liquidated damages against that contractor, which basically a certain rate that the contractor have to pay for every day of delay. However, a lot of time we end up that the principal will waive that right, will not exercise that right. Then, of course, the contractor will not pay it, and the principal choose to do this, and that's because of they want to maintain good relationship with the contractor, and of course, vice versa. Oftentimes the contractor file claims, and he have certain right that he needs to exercise because maybe the principal did not pay on time, or whatever reason is. Once again, the contractor oftentimes decide or choose to waive that right to pursue that any further in order to maintain good relationship. We have to remember, especially in our market in the Middle East, the number of really good I want to say maybe or contractors or principals with good maybe standing or popular in the market is kind of limited. So we do not really want to ruin the relationship between the two parties whenever it started. Another very important point is the notice of breach. Once the breach takes place, it's extremely important that the other party that suffered damages is to file a notice for the breach as soon as they can. Normally, there is certain number of days according to the contract terms and conditions where you should file that notice. Notices can be really an important part of the contractual relationship, so we need to pay attention and read the notice clause, and you have to comply totally with that. So once the breach takes place, the other party is expected to file a notice, to submit a notice to the other party within a certain time frame. Otherwise, there's a chance that the other party will lose his rights. Once the notice has been filed and there's damages, there will be a remedy, especially if we end up going to court. There will be remedies, and the remedies can be financial, money damages, it can be equitable remedies, it can be performance, it can be rescission, it can be restitution, or it can be, of course, money damages, compensational, consequential, liquidated, or whatever. So it's very important to before you go to court is to think very clearly or to make sure that you are sure that you want to go to court, and you need to determine what are the benefits you want to get from that, what are the remedies, what are the things you want to get out of this deal. Most of the disputes, we have to remember, most of the problems that we face between the contractor and the principal usually are settled out of court. Both parties really do not like to go to court, try to avoid it as much as they can, and they usually find a way to get out. If you end up going to court, then it's a different place, and you have to think about damages there you are going to get, or you are going to suffer from this. Before we get further, there is a poll that I would like to ask all the participants in this webinar, and the poll will be the conflict itself. What do you think is the number one, the most important source of conflicts in the contracts in the Middle East? A, unqualified contractor. B, poor or unclear scope of work. C, poor performance measurement system. Or D, single or sole sourcing. So I'm gonna be silent for a minute. Please go ahead and answer the questions. Answer this question, and then we are going to discuss this in a little bit. Maybe they have to use the poll itself, right? Some people are writing BBB. Okay, it can. Okay. Okay, so as expected, that's exactly, it's a kind of classical answer. Uh, B, the poor scope of work is probably the number one reason behind the conflicts between the principal and the contractors. Other reasons are very important as well, but maybe the number one, the most common one, is the poor scope of work. Unqualified contractor can definitely cause a big problem. Or sometimes I want to call them that's unskilled contractor, or sometimes contractors with bad faith also can cause a lot of problems. Poor performance, of course, the system. If we don't have a system, it can cause a lot of issues. Um, Lucina mentioned that not explaining well by the management, maybe definitely another good reason. Single and sole source can be, especially in in the markets that have agencies, but in general, everywhere, whether here or also in the West, we probably have the poor scope of work would consider to be maybe the number one reason or the most important reason behind the problems and the conflicts between contractor and principal. Having said that, it's not a surprise by any means. Actually, it's expected. And from there, we can actually go ahead and talk about why, before we go for, why it is. In the scope of work, of course, the principal is responsible on developing a scope of work. So he is responsible on providing very clear scope of work. If the scope of work is not clear, we need to remember all the time the contractor is legally obliged to do the minimum performance. So if the contractor does the minimum performance, there is nothing, he fulfilled his contractual obligation. There is nothing we can do for him in order to basically pursue him. So the burden of developing scope of work is on the principal, and the contractor, the burden of doing the performance is on the contractor. And that's why investing maybe time and efforts, and even going through consultants, or investing in developing a scope of work will definitely reduce the amount of conflicts and disputes and problems we suffer during the contract administration phase, and vice versa. Now, if we assume we have Mr. Muhammad Al-Murhi asks, how can I record? So later on, I think it will be recorded. Having said that, now we have a conflict. I have a problem with the contractor. How can I manage it? And this is probably the most the most slide that I probably would like to focus on. The tools and the techniques that can help me managing conflicts and disputes, and it may be by order, would be communication, coordination, change management process, and notices. Number one would be core communication. Communication is key in all contract management overall, all contract administration, contract preparation, awarding, tendering, communication between the two parties is one of the most important things that we need to do overall. When it comes to disputes and conflicts, especially, we will find a big chunk of the disputes can come out actually poor communication. Miscommunication can be really a big problem, and that can cause issues. And even if there's an issue, a lot of time we have a problem in communicating how to solve this issue. A lot of misunderstanding, especially in international markets, such as here in Dubai or in the Gulf area, or actually at this point all over the world. People come from different have different language skills, culture, backgrounds, and that can play a major role in miscommunication. It's extremely important to use very clear words or sentences. It's very important when you use when you use an email or letter to choose, to write very properly and clearly, and try to avoid as much as you can any miscommunication. The contract administrators and contract managers truly, they need, I usually say that all the time, and even in my courses, that they need to find a way to master their communication skills, both written and verbal, and actually even nonverbal. It's very, very imperative that those in contract we are communicating very clearly to avoid any problem, and even if we have any problem or any dispute or any conflicts, we'll be able to resolve this. The other one is coordination. You really have to have the intention and coordination between you and the contractor. You need to coordinate your activities. You need to cooperate. You need to make sure we are not stepping at each other's feet. We need to make sure that any step that the contractor is doing basically is communicated properly and coordinated with the subcontractors and also with the main principal or the owner or the client. You need to make sure also that we have a focal point. You need to make sure that all the communication and all the messages that go back and forth goes through this focal point that can control and be aware of all the issues that's happening in this contract. The third one is probably as important, which is change management process. We need to have definitely a very good change management process. Every organization does mostly at this point does have their own change management process. It's imperative that we follow the change management process to the T. I mean, we need to make sure that the change management process procedures, steps, templates, forms, what happens exactly, who's going to do the analysis, the evaluation of the changes, how can we start a variation request or change request, how to process it, how to approve it, who's going to authorize it. All those need to be detailed in your contract, especially under the terms and conditions, and you need to make sure that we are very familiar with that and it's followed. You are following it and making sure also the other party is following it. This can truly reduce the amount of disputes significantly. We have to remember a lot of time that a lot of conflicts happens because of changes and variations and miscommunication about the reimbursement of those changes, how to process those changes, the effect of that changes, and the impact of those changes. Another important way to manage conflicts is notices, documentation of the event, of the breach, documentation of what are we going to do regarding the issues and the problems is extremely important. We need to make sure, as we said probably a little bit earlier, that the notices clause and in the contract is followed literally. I mean, we have to know to go through those notice clause, to know what is exactly how to file the clause, to whom supposed to be filed, what is the escalation process, what the timing, how many days I need in order between the event of breach and the notice, the filing of the notice. All those also need to be followed in order to protect my right and to protect my right in the future to file a claim. and or to for negotiation purposes in the future. So those four main tools and techniques can help me significantly in both in doing two things: reducing the amount of conflicts and disputes, and the second thing is, even if we have conflict and disputes or problems, it will help me quite a bit in solving them by having clear communication, coordination with the other party, following the change management and having change management log, and finally notices and response to those notices. Moving forward, we are going to talk about, of course, now we have a dispute. Let's assume we're having a problem and this problem hasn't been solved. So what are we going to do to do in this case? Now we are in the status of dispute. If the situation gets worse, then we have an actual dispute between me and between us and the other party, then you need to remember all the time the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is always, always, always we try to solve the problem amicably. Least formal way, most collaborative manner as much as we can. Going through legal proceedings, go through legal system and court system is a nightmare. We really do not want to go there. We try to find another alternatives to do it. Try to talk to the other party, try to negotiate with the other party, and try to avoid to going to do any legal proceedings as much as we can. And the reason, as we are all familiar with, legal proceedings has money impact, has time impact, delays. Sometimes cases stays in court for years, 3-4 years. And even when they take they take a verdict, they do a verdict on it, and sometimes, oftentimes actually, they appeal. It takes even another 1, 2 to 3 years. Another problem we face a lot when if you end up going to court is uncertainty of outcomes. We do not know how's the judge going to go with. So again, a lot of time it's the judge that they might not be familiar with that particular type of business. Another problem we face when we go through a lot of courts is our reputation will be affected. You don't want to have a reputation that you are a problem maker, and contractors or contractors will start avoiding working with you. And definitely going to court will affect your business relationship with the other partner. And again, the number of contractors or principals can be limited in certain markets. So we have, again, if we have a dispute, one of the things we're trying to do as much as we can is to find a settlement or to settle. And we usually do that through negotiation. So we usually, we sit down and we negotiate what are the claims, what will the change orders, the issues, the risks, all those, the liquidated damages. We try to hash out, what do I owe you and what you owe me, and then after that we try to find a way to settle out of court. Settlement definitely has to be voluntary. We cannot just force people to settle. They both have with all their free will to go and do the settlement. Once it's settled, then it's this chapter is totally and forever closed. So instead of going to court, what other options do we have? Do we have other options? Yes, definitely we do. The other options we have will start with negotiation. Negotiation meaning basically try to, as we said a little bit earlier when I was talking about the settlement, we need to sit down and hash out our differences and trying to find a way out. We need to compromise. We need to try to find, maybe apply problem-solving techniques or creative techniques in order to find maybe a new way to solve this problem that we both can be benefited out of it. So we are trying in negotiation. We're trying to get the principal try to get what he wants, but we also will allow the contractor to get what he wants. So, and that's definitely the most common one. That's the most important one. Another technique we can use is mediation. Mediation is very similar to negotiation. in which we use mediators. So basically, instead of negotiation one-on-one, you're negotiating in front of a third neutral expert party who can provide us with, who can maybe facilitate, if you will, this negotiation. Definitely mediation is voluntary. Both parties has to agree on it. You cannot force one party to do it. And also it's not binding. Conciliation and appraisal, they are very similar to each other, in which you are getting a third party, and you are the third party he speaks up his mind, he speaks out, and he will let you know what action do we should be followed. But we have to remember also both conciliation and appraisals are also non-binding. Many trial we don't do them here in the Middle East, but you find them in the US, maybe in the UK, where it's a parallel private court system where people just can have the option to go there and file their case, and it will be taken care of. But again, we don't have such a system here in the Middle East. And finally, the most common one after negotiation, maybe and mediation, would be arbitration. Arbitration is normally binding. It can be non-binding, but very rarely, but most of the time it is binding. It is usually under the terms and conditions. Under the terms and conditions, and then we need, if you have it under your terms and conditions, then you need to go for arbitration instead of court system. Arbitration, normally we see them here, arbitrators, you can find them in Chamber of Commerce, where you can basically decide on one arbitrator. It can be a panel of arbitrators, like 3 or 5 or even 7. But it depends on how big is the case. Most of the time, arbitration is binding and is final, and that will save us a lot of time and a lot of money. So that's a little bit brief on how to deal with those with disputes and conflicts. Try to avoid them, and even if we have disputes and conflicts, then what can we do in order to make sure that things don't get worse? If things get worse, like we are actually in a dispute, then we know what are the different options that we have in order to resolve those disputes. So this is a little bit what I wanted to talk about, and the last thing I want to talk about is here. Of course, if everything fails, then we're going to end up going to court. Some tips. Once again, I cannot emphasize much on communication. You need to communicate and communicate even more. Negotiation is very important in contract management in every phase, whether it's preparation, whether it's administration, or even in settling differences. You need to have very good change management process. At this point, at this time and age, not having a good change management is a recipe of disaster. Changes will happen. It will happen. It's inevitable. Changes will happen, and you need to know how to handle them. Documentation is a very important, extremely important key. We need to document as much as we can for every event in order to avoid any misunderstanding, and even if disputes happen, then we'll know we need to have a record for it. And of course, we have to remember all the time to address issues, variations, changes, and claims as much as we can, as fast as we can, in order to avoid any problems in the future. Just to remind you, the questions will be answered right after. I think I have only one more slide before we open it for Q&A. And those are just the list of the courses we actually provide at Meirc in contract management. We do preparation, administration, basically preparation before signing. Think about it, before signing the contract. Administration is after signing the contract. We have another course for tendering procedures, negotiation, of course, and then how to manage contractual claims. We have project management for contractual professionals. And finally, we have drafting contracts and writing scope of work. So those are the courses we offer in Meirc. And hopefully, if you have any questions regarding these courses or about any topic we talked about it in this webinar, please, now it's time for Q&A. And I see one question here, which is Mr. Yao Adolfo. He is asking, in negotiation, do you involve a third party? And the answer is you may, you can. And as we said earlier, if you want to involve a neutral third party, a lot of time it will be called mediation. So mediators are usually a facilitator for negotiation. They're supposed to be a neutral third party, and we have to pay for them. And usually we pay them like 50-50. So basically half and half. I hope that answers your questions, Mr. If not, please let me know, and I'm open for any questions. Miss Khulud, she's asking, do you have variation management course? We do have the managing contractually claims, which have also variation orders. So we do both in this course. Managing contractual claims have both variation orders and claims. Any more questions? Okay, Lucina Fay, story, calling center using the government property and private or personal number of an expatriate. My question is, the person used to receive calls from people who's thinking that this number is a calling center. Conflicts happened when this person reported it to our government. Conflicts happened, reported. Okay. So story. So I'm not sure what is the person used to receive thinking. I'm not sure what is the question though. I am not really sure in this case. I really do not know. Maybe it's better to ask an attorney. I probably can have a dedicated gas, but it's just a gas. So if somebody using my number, the government involved, not involved, or legal legal. Who's thinking? Truly, there is nothing you can do. I don't think there is. I mean, if people think it's a calling center and people keep calling you, I do not know. I mean, I do not know truly what's. I really do not know. I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything you can do. Maybe just report it to police. And if you report to police, I don't know what action they will do. So it's really beyond my expertise. Sorry. I think, okay. Thank you, Lucina. I think maybe there's a couple questions coming. So we'll try to see those questions. Okay, Mr. Ibrahim, can I find reliable templates online of the documents you have taught, change management, notice, clauses, documentation that can be included in IT system development contract? I bet you can. Online, there are plenty of documents that you can find all change management, claims, notice. The only thing, I think some of them, which is the better ones, probably you have to buy them, but definitely you can. Mr. Isaac asking question, after settling a dispute between two parties in the same establishment, does the guilty party need to bear all the legal costs? If they end up going to court, the question after, yeah, if they end up going to court, then yes, usually the guilty party have to bear the costs of the court fees and things like that. Abraham is asking, can you mention the name of courses you offer again? Actually, you should be. Can they see them? Can you see? Yeah, you can just look at the slides. It's right there. Actually, you can see it right now. Which is effective contract preparation, contract administration, tendering procedures, negotiation contracts, managing contractual claims, project management for contract professionals, and finally drafting contracts and scope of work. You are welcome, Mr. Ibrahim Isaac and Mr. Isaac. We have another question. How do we solve disputes arise because of change in the government rule? This can be considered sometime as force majeure, and it depends. If there is a dispute because of the change in government, or government changed certain rules, then we have to definitely to abide with the government ruling. And again, sometimes can be considered to be force majeure. In any ways, it depends on how the contract is written. For example, if you are following FIDIC clearly calls for if there is a change in the management and the government rule, then the owner or the principal is responsible on paying for that. So it depends also on how the contract is written. Who bears the legal cost of what? Ms. Somebody, Adidinowala asked, who bears the legal cost? The legal cost of what? I do not know. So can you please elaborate? Kareem is asking, in your point of view and expertise, FIDIC is fair and applicable in GCC. Do you prefer FIDIC or NEC as a contract? If you were so, I personally, that's a personal, I probably in construction specifically, or I probably FIDIC, but I'm also more familiar with FIDIC. Hi, Mr. Ala. This is Raz Hisham from Deco Tech Qatar. How to manage contractual conflicts in case of variation related to scope of work and extension time is not granted by a main contractor claiming lump sum contract. So how to manage contractual conflicts in case of variation related to scope of work. Okay. Now, you guys to be in order to be fair, any change, any variation of the scope will result normally to either change in the cost or change in the time, or both. So not every change will definitely have will result in extension or extending the time frame of the contract. So you need to prove that if I am the principal, I would definitely need to ask the contractor to prove that the change will affect time and how, and maybe I would use my maybe project management expertise for that. So whether it's a lump sum contract or non-lump sum contracts, any change will result. We know all of it that it will result in changes in the time and the cost, but we need to prove that. So that's what I would do. So the way I ask is communicate with the contractor and make sure that he needs to submit all the documentation and the reports that shows me that this is truly, the time is affected and how. Previous question. Who's supposed? Regarding the previous question, who's supposed to bear? Usually the guilty party does. Usually does the guilty party pay for that? After settling a dispute between two parties in the same establishment, does the guilty party bear? Yes. Usually the guilty party bear all the legal costs. For in the same establishment, you mean in the same company? I'm not sure if that's correct. I don't know if it's the same company. Maybe we need to consult with an attorney at this point. But generally speaking, if there are two parties end up going to court, the guilty party or the losing party, if you will eventually have to pay the court fees. Is understanding note considered as part of negotiation process is understanding maybe notice. الملداوي Ismail Khamis is understanding, if you mean, if is understanding notices considered to be part of negotiation process? Definitely notices will be important in negotiation and non-negotiation. Notices is one of the most important term and condition. We find it when we need to administer the contract, whether we just regularly administering it or negotiating or solving problems, it comes very handy. So it's really important if that's what you meant. Can you share the slides with us? Definitely I can. They will be on site after 5 days, on our website in 5 days. Thank you from Dubai Tourism. Thank you very much, Mr. Ajmal. You are most welcome. Any more questions? If currency situation dropped somehow, do we agree after signing contract? It depends again on how much, I mean, the significance of the dropping. Certain situations can be considered to be force majeure. So it depends on the situation. There is no general rule, and everything by, agreement. If both parties agree on it, it would work. Can you share the slides via email? Yes, we can. It will be shared. If you have their email, it will be sent to you. Any more questions? Thank you. You're most welcome. Nice. Thank you very much, Lucina and Mr. Emmanuel. Okay, we are going to end here. Thank you all very much. If you have any questions later on, you can always email me. You should have my email, and you should receive the slides via email, and it's going to be on our website. Having said that, you have a very good evening, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Meirc.com